Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast is your one-stop shop for fantasy football news and advice. Can't decide on who to draft on the first round? Going gaga on how to line up your team. Got you covered. Traditional leagues, Dynasty League, PPR League, IDP League, even Daily Fantasy Football League. Join us as we break down all the questions of fantasy football. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast.
And welcome to another edition of the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Kenneth Gruenfelder, and we got a lot to talk about today. We're going to talk about the 10 players from the draft that I think are going to be essentials when it comes to your Dynasty League. Then we're going to talk about the 10 offenses that I think are the most improved after the draft and after free agency. Then we're going to move into the 10 players that I think were most affected by the draft and by free agency, and then we're going to finish it off with a fantasy analysis of the NFC West. What are the players that I think you're going to want to get on your teams from the NFC West? So let's begin. So as I mentioned, we're going to talk about the 10 players from the NFL draft that got drafted that I think are going to be essential when you're doing your Dynasty leagues. So the first player I have is Trevor Lawrence. Now, something that I said on the last show, I said that Trevor Lawrence won the Heisman like it was nothing. And I will be the first to admit and come up front that I didn't realize that he did not win a Heisman Trophy during his college tenure. Because when I went back and I was looking through, the different Heisman Trophy winners, to kind of, talk about some different things, for the upcoming show, I noticed that Trevor Lawrence's name was absent from that. Now, I knew Devontae Smith won, and I remember that Joe Burrow won it, his last year that he played for LSU. But I forgot that Kyler Murray won it the year before that, and I'm pretty sure that was the year that Clemson won the national championship. So, me just assuming, Trevor Lawrence won the Heisman Trophy that year, I was sadly mistaken, and I apologize for that because, that just shows how great, my college football knowledge is, so it was an honest mistake, and hopefully something like that doesn't happen again. That's why you got to do your research, for everything, before you come on and talk about stuff. But I should have knew that regardless, but that's because he's a great player. But anyway, so Trevor Lawrence, get back to what, we're supposed to be talking about as fantasy here, and I think Trevor Lawrence is going to be a top fantasy player that you're going to want to get when it comes to Dynasty leagues. Jacksonville, they really put some pieces around him. They drafted Travis Etienne, who will be coming up in a little bit, the running back that was for Clemson. They brought in Marvin Jones, and they have some pieces in place already in Jacksonville, like DJ Chark and Chenault, the other wide receiver that they had a nice season last year. So they got some pieces around Trevor Lawrence, and they're only going to build that. And you look at Trevor Lawrence's stats, from his college career. In 2018, 30 touchdowns, 4 interceptions. In 2019, 36 touchdowns, 8 interceptions. And then in 2020, 24 touchdowns to 5 interceptions, and they only played 10 games, but that's, due to COVID. But, every year he had over a 65% completion, and, he passed for 3,000 yards in all 3 years that he started for Clemson. And you know what? I think a lot of people really think that he's going to translate to the NFL and he's going to be productive. And I think so too. Jacksonville is really doing a nice job rebuilding this team, and I think that, Trevor Lawrence does have some weapons around him, though they're not, they're not household names. They're pretty good players. Marvin Jones is a pretty good player. DJ Chark is a pretty good player. I've talked about a couple times how Marvin Jones can be touchdown dependent, but I think with that and the fact that Urban Meyer has come out and said that they're going to want to run the football, I think that that Trevor Lawrence can be successful. I really think he can. I think he might be a slight upgrade over Gardner Minshew, but we'll have to wait and see how he does. And like I mentioned on the last show, he's going to be playing, defenses like the Texans twice a year, so I think he's going to have some really good games. I really do. And I think that, as time goes on, he's going to, they're going to put better weapons around him. They're going to put better pieces around him for him to be successful. And because of that, you're going to want to have him on your team, if you're doing a dynasty league, because he should be a quarterback for the next 10, 15 years, if it pans out. I mean, he was drafted first overall for a reason, and the Jaguars are putting a lot of stock into this guy to be the answer at the quarterback position that they need. Because, let's be honest, they really haven't had a franchise quarterback. They had that one brief, moment of success with Blake Bortles, but Blake Bortles was terrible the year after they went to the AFC Championship game. So hopefully this is the guy that is going to give Jacksonville long-term success, and hopefully is a guy that gives you long-term success in your dynasty league. So the next player I have on this list is Ja'Marr Chase, the wide receiver that was taken from LSU in the draft and was drafted by the Bengals. And, he sat out the 2020 season, but, looking at his stats from 2018 and 2019, in 2018 only had 313 yards for 3 touchdowns, but then in 2019 had a really great season, having over 1,700 yards receiving and 20 touchdowns. And the Bengals took him because, of the chemistry that he had with Joe Burrow. And, that was kind of a pick that I thought, they should have went with an offensive lineman because, there was some pretty good offensive linemen sitting there. And Joe Burrow got injured because of the fact that he didn't have an offensive line to properly protect him. But the Bengals wanted to bring in a guy that Joe Burrow had success with and has chemistry with and has a great relationship with, to help build this team and build a great offense. And you know what? Not to say, again, I think I said it on the last show, it's not a bad pick. It's just, the Bengals had other needs that needed to be addressed, I think, before getting more weapons for Joe Burrow. But, I mean, it does make sense considering that they did play together in college. I just think they should have addressed the offensive line before that. But, nonetheless, a great pick, and I think another guy that maybe you want to have on your dynasty team because, I think especially the fact that they have chemistry, Joe Burrow and Ja'Marr Chase, they should be able to be successful at the NFL level. Joe Burrow, he was productive in his first season in the NFL before he got injured, and if it wasn't for him tearing his ACL, his numbers, and every other thing in his knee, he would have. He would have had better stats. He would have better stats. I mean, there was really the only game that he didn't do good in was probably the Ravens game and the Steelers games that he played in. He was terrible in those games. But other than that, he was productive, and I think that when he comes back, he's going to be able to be successful. And the Bengals, they're building something too. Hopefully, with Ja'Marr Chase along with T. Higgins being there, those guys are going to be his 2 top targets. You got Joe Mixon coming back. They're going to have it looks like a pretty good offense. So Ja'Marr Chase is another guy coming into the league that you're probably going to want to get on your fantasy team when it comes to dynasty leagues. All right, so the next player I have here is Jalen Waddle, who was one of the Alabama receivers that was taken in the draft by the Miami Dolphins. And, looking at his stats now, he was injured for a large portion of the 2020 season. I believe it was an ankle injury that had him sidelined. But, looking at his stats, in the 6 games that he did play in, had 591 yards, 4 touchdowns. Still productive, for that Alabama offense that was historic in 2020. And now he's going to a team in Miami that, they got some weapons. They have Devontae Parker. They signed Will Fuller, who's going to be suspended for the first couple weeks of the season. And they have Mike Gesicki at tight end, who's, he's pretty good too. So Miami's got a lot of good players. And now he's going to be reunited with Tua Tagovailoa. And, hopefully they can, rebuild that chemistry that they had in Alabama, just like, Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase are going to be doing in Cincinnati, Miami kind of took the same approach. They got Tua, now they got Waddle. So, they got some Alabama players, on offense. And I think Waddle can do good, especially the first couple of weeks, because Will Fuller's going to be out, so he's going to be, the guy opposite of Devontae Parker. And he's another player that you should get for your dynasty leagues. A lot of people are high on him as well, to think that, his game is going to translate to the NFL, and he's going to get a lot of targets, I think, in the first couple of weeks because, they're going to be missing one of their key guys in Will Fuller. So he's going to get a lot of targets to start the year. And, he's another guy that, maybe you're going to want to get for long-term success in your dynasty leagues. Now, who knows who the quarterback is going to be for Miami going forward, because the jury is still out on Tua, and a lot of people are still skeptical on whether or not Tua is the answer at quarterback. But if they got a guy like Deshaun Watson, I think the stock for Jalen Waddle goes up even more, if all that Deshaun Watson stuff gets straightened out. So, we'll see. I mean, we have no idea. Everything's kind of been quiet. But, I think, again, Jalen Waddle's another player that you're going to want to get for your dynasty leagues. All right, so the next player I have here is the other Alabama wide receiver that was taken in the draft by the Philadelphia Eagles, and that is Devontae Smith, who won the Heisman Trophy in 2020. Not Trevor Lawrence. I mean, I knew that, but, just making a joke of myself. So Devontae Smith had a fantastic season in 2020. 1,800 yards and had 23 touchdown receptions. I mean, that's just incredible. Had an incredible season. I mean, the Alabama offense was unbelievable in 2020. And I think he's another guy that you're going to want to get because, let's be honest, he's going to be the number one guy in Philadelphia. They have Jalen Reagor there, who really did not have a particularly productive rookie season, and the Eagles, they still have Zach Ertz there. They didn't get rid of him yet. Dallas Goedert is there, and you got other guys, like Travis Fulgham, I think, is still there. J.J. Arcega-Whiteside, so, Philadelphia is kind of lacking in terms of weapons. And I think Devontae Smith, a lot of people are talking about his size and, how that's going to translate to the NFL. So we'll have to wait and see. But he's going to be the main target for Jalen Hurts, and I think he's going to be successful. Because obviously if you're the number one guy, you're going to get some targets. And, let's see how he does. But I think he's another guy you're going to want to get for your dynasty leagues. Unfortunately for me, I really wish that he was a Giant, because if he was with the Giants and you had Galladay and Slayton and Shepard with, and Barkley coming back and, you throw Devontae Smith in there, that would be amazing. But unfortunately that did not happen, as a Giant fan. But that's okay. That's fine. The wounds will start to heal as we, get closer to the season. And, of course the Eagles, they sit their starting quarterback, they put in Nate Sudfeld and make Washington win the division, and the Giants don't win the division because of that. But the Giants should have won more games. I'm getting way off topic. It's just another reason to not like the Eagles. But Devontae Smith, another player that you're going to want to get for your dynasty leagues. Now the next player I have is Kyle Pitts, who was the tight end taken out of Florida by the Atlanta Falcons. This was another pick like Jamar Chase, where I thought that the Falcons, they should have addressed other positions, maybe even taken a quarterback, but they did not do that. They wanted to add another weapon to this offense, to pair him up with Julio Jones and Calvin Ridley. I mean, this offense looks dangerous, on paper. And he's regarded as, maybe the next big thing at tight end. Maybe the next, George Kittle, Travis Kelce, Gronk in his prime, and looking at some of his stats, in 2020, it was his best season, had 770 yards receiving and 12 touchdowns, and this was in his junior year. In each year he improved. Obviously, in 2018, only played in 3 games and only had 3 receptions for 73 yards and a touchdown. Then in 2019, he played in 13 games, had 54 receptions, 649 yards, and 5 touchdowns. And then in 2020, like I said, had 770 yards receiving and 12 touchdowns. And this was only in 8 games. So if they played a full season, his stats would have been so much better. At least that's, what I would think. But, he's regarded as the next big thing. And, tight ends, like I've been saying, are a thin position when it comes to fantasy. There's really not a lot of them that you can really rely upon. And if he's the next big thing, and people believe that, you should take him in your dynasty leagues. And again, Atlanta is, a pass-happy offense. And, Matt Ryan is getting up there in age, and I understand that. Matt Ryan, I think, could still be productive. He hasn't really... I think he's starting to dip a little bit in terms of production. I think I've mentioned that before. But I think he's still going to be a quality fantasy quarterback, and I think he wants to utilize his tight ends, because we saw that with Austin Hooper and even, back in the good old days with Tony Gonzalez. So maybe we'll see something kind of similar to that when it comes to Kyle Pitts, So he's another guy that, you want to get for your dynasty leagues because, like I said, the tight end spot's very thin, and if he is everything that he is cracked up to be, he's somebody that you're going to want to have in your dynasty leagues because Atlanta's going to be throwing the ball a lot, and I think as long as Matt Ryan is still playing at a somewhat decent level, he's going to produce. So the next player is Justin Fields, and he was taken by the Bears. The Giants, they traded picks with the Bears. The Giants went down to 20. The Bears jumped up to 11 to get Justin Fields. Had great seasons, especially from 2019 to 2020. In 2019 had 3,200 yards passing, 41 touchdowns to just 3 interceptions, and that was in 14 games. And then in 2020, in 8 games, had 2,100 yards, 22 touchdowns, and 6 interceptions. Again, I think he's another guy you're going to want to take. A lot of people are high on him as well. Now, I think the Bears, they got to put some more pieces around him. He could start week 1, who knows? But I think he'll do a lot better than, Mitchell Trubisky and, Andy Dalton. So we'll see what happens. But I think he's another guy you're going to want to get because, listen, the Bears, they still got some players there. They still got Allen Robinson. David Montgomery had a really good season, especially in the second half. So they do have some pieces around him. So when he does start, I think he's going to have some success, but we'll have to wait and see. But yeah, he's another player that you're going to want to key in on for your dynasty leagues. All right, so the next player is Kadarius Toney, who the Giants took with the 20th overall pick in the draft, and he was really good in 2020. This was his breakout season, 984 receiving yards and 10 touchdown receptions in only 11 games. As a senior, was productive. The Giants, they wanted to get this guy, add more weapons around Daniel Jones, and people refer to him as the joystick. And, people are saying that he might be the guy to replace Sterling Shepard because, Sterling Shepard is going to be a free agent, I believe, after the 2021 season. So it looks like Kadarius Toney will be the long-term answer at the slot receiver position. So, this is another weapon to give Daniel Jones. And I think, the Giants, they're going to put a scheme together that they're going to heavily utilize this guy. And hopefully he's productive because, a lot of people said he's really good. And, Urban Meyer said he was heartbroken over the fact that the Giants got him, before the Jaguars were able to get him with, I believe, the 25th overall pick the Jaguars had because they had 2 first-round picks. But yeah, he's another guy that you're maybe going to want to consider for your dynasty leagues. So next is Najee Harris, the running back that was taken out of Alabama and was taken by the Pittsburgh Steelers. And I think a lot of people knew that was going to happen. When you look at his career in Alabama, all his stats increased. And, you look at 2019, 1,200 yards rushing, 13 touchdowns, and then in 2020, over 1,400 yards and 26 rushing touchdowns. Now, the one thing that I'm concerned about is the Steelers' offensive line because Mike Pouncey retired. Alejandro Villanueva left in free agency to join the Ravens. The Steelers, they used 2 draft picks. They drafted Kendrick Green, the guard out of Illinois, and in the 4th round they drafted Dan Moore Jr., the offensive tackle out of Texas A&M. So they're trying to rebuild that offensive line. They did somewhat address it in the draft. So hopefully the Steelers' offensive line can somewhat block for him because, he's leaving this historic team, this historic offense in Alabama and joining the Pittsburgh Steelers, who were really one of the worst rushing teams in the NFL, in large part because the offensive line really took a massive step back and guys were getting older. And yeah, so, Najee Harris is another guy that you're going to want to get because the Steelers, they'll figure it out, I think, at the offensive line positions. I think they'll figure all that stuff out. Now, the quarterback position is a little different, but, I think that if the Steelers' offensive line is somewhat productive, Najee Harris should be able to produce. And the last two guys we have here, so we got the other running back that was taken out of Clemson, Travis Etienne, who I brought up before. This past season, in 12 games, had 914 yards rushing and 14 touchdowns, and was amazing in 2018. Had 1,600 yards rushing, 24 touchdowns, and then 2019, over 1,600 yards again, and 19 touchdowns there. Really was productive in all 4 seasons that he was with Clemson. And let's see how he does in Jacksonville. I think that, with Trevor Lawrence, they're going to have that chemistry, like I talked about with Jamar Chase and Joe Burrow and Jalen Waddle and Tua. There's going to be chemistry that's there, and hopefully that's successful. Urban Meyer talked about wanting to run the football a lot, and Jacksonville does have a couple other running backs on their roster. So let's see how he does. But again, he's another guy that you're maybe going to want to stash on your Dynasty League teams. And then finally, I chose Rashad Bateman, who was the wide receiver taken out of Minnesota by the Baltimore Ravens. And I think he should help this offense because the Ravens averaged 171 passing yards per game, and they had 257 completions, which was last in the NFL. Both of those stats that I just said were last in the NFL. And they did not have a single 1,000-yard receiver. Marquise Brown led the team with 769 yards receiving. They had no 1,000-yard receiver. So hopefully Rashad Bateman can come in and be that guy that the Ravens need because the wide receiver spot is very weak on this team, and they addressed it through the draft and through free agency. So hopefully Rashad Bateman is another guy that could come in and help this offense out. So he's another guy that I say you take a chance on him. So with that, those are the 10 players that I think you should take for your Dynasty Leagues. We're going to take our first break of the show. When we come back, we're going to talk about the 10 offenses that I think improved the most after the draft and after free agency, and how that's going to impact fantasy. Who should you take? What players' draft stocks increased? All that stuff. So stick around. We'll be right back here on the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines. They got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
All right, and we are back here on the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast for segment number 2 of the show. We're going to talk about the top 10 offenses that I think are the most improved from the draft and from free agency, and how does that impact fantasy? What players' draft stocks go up? Really, for the most part, how does this impact fantasy? What players should you take? All that kind of stuff. So with that, let's get right into it. So one of the teams that I think had a great draft and a great free agency is the Chargers, particularly when it comes to the offensive line. They brought in Corey Linsley, the Pro Bowl center from the Packers. They got Matt Fielder, the guard from Pittsburgh. They drafted Rashawn Slater from Northwestern, the left tackle, which a lot of people, really loved going into this draft. And, some of my friends who are Giant fans wanted him to go to the Giants. And then they got Josh Palmer, the wide receiver out of Tennessee, in the 3rd round. So the Chargers really, built this offensive line because they are prioritizing building, protection around Justin Herbert. And Justin Herbert already had a great rookie season, like I keep on mentioning, coming on the scene in week 2 against the Chiefs where, there were some mishaps in the Chargers medical staff when they, messed up the injection with Tyrod Taylor, and that made him miss week 2 against the Chiefs, and, the rest is history. And, it's very important to build an offensive line around your quarterback. And the other thing that I forgot to mention, it's just a minor thing that the Chargers did, was they brought in Jared Cook to replace Hunter Henry, who left in free agency to join the Patriots. Now, I really think that the Chargers are going to have a great season. I think that Justin Herbert is going to be even better than he was his rookie season because he's going to be better protected. And I think, you're going to have Austin Eckler coming back, and he was in and out of the lineup last year. He dealt with some injuries. You got that, and you got that coupled with the fact they still have Keenan Allen, who had a resurgence in 2020, kind of put everybody back on notice. I'm still here. He was still to prove that he was still a productive wide receiver. You have Mike Williams on the opposite side. They got a lot of weapons around him, and now they are going to protect Justin Herbert, and that should make him even better. So I think that, Justin Herbert's draft stock is going to be way up there. He's going to be one of the first QBs you take off the board because he was insane in fantasy last year. Outside of the game against New England where, he had like 2 points and, they lost 45-0. But, Austin Eckler's draft stock is going to go up because, one, he's coming back from injury, and now they got an offensive line, so, he's going to be able to excel if the offensive line is able to protect and run block. And, wide receivers too. They're going to benefit from that. They're going to try to create separation and get open if Justin Herbert continues to have a lot of time in the pocket, and they're going to get open when, coverage breaks down, and they're going to get some more points too. Now, Mike Williams, he gets banged up a lot, but, him and Keenan Allen together, you bring in Jared Cook, who is a serviceable tight end, can be very inconsistent at times. There's a lot of guys on this team that you're going to want to draft, when it comes to fantasy. And I think that all starts up front with the offensive line. If Justin Herbert is protected, this offense is going to be insane, and there's going to be a lot of players on this team that you're going to want to take when fantasy drafts start happening in the coming months. So another offense that I have is the Jacksonville Jaguars. They upgraded at quarterback. They upgraded at wide receiver. And I just feel like this team is going to be able to move the football. Trevor Lawrence, I think, is going to be a upgrade over Gardner Minshew and Mike Glennon, especially Mike Glennon, who is actually now a New York Giant. And then you look at the other pieces that they added. They added Marvin Jones to go along with DJ Chark and Chenault at the wide receiver spot. They draft Travis Etienne to go with James Robinson. And they also brought in Carlos Hyde, and Urban Meyer has said that they want to run the football. So this team on paper, offensively, they're going to put up some points, and they're going to be one of those scrappy teams that teams are going to have to deal with over the course of the season. And, like I mentioned in the last show and in the last segment, I think Trevor Lawrence is going to be a solid fantasy option. I think I said it on the last show, but I think that, for me, when it comes to rookie quarterbacks, I kind of tend to stay away from them because, I'm skeptical of them, how they're going to be, now, going from the college game to the NFL game, how is their game going to translate to the NFL? So that's why I kind of stay away from them. But I think that, Trevor Lawrence can be a guy that, you want to take in a 2 QB league. He could be like your third QB. He could be in your number 2. In, regular leagues, like with 1 QB, maybe you get somebody else who's, proven themselves in fantasy and is a better option. And then maybe you use Trevor Lawrence as kind of like your backup, or if he goes undrafted, like I mentioned in the last show, you pick him up as a streamer option if he's going up against a bad opponent. Like I said, he's going up against the Texans twice a year, so, their defense is going to be terrible. So, that would definitely be a great week to start him. And I overall, like I said, I just think the Jaguars are going to be a scrappy team that nobody's really going to want to play because they're going to put up points. I think really their weakness is their defense, but, they really fixed up this offense. And, they added a lot of pieces that, coupled with the talent that they already have there, like DJ Chark, like James Robinson, who are good players, James Robinson being that undrafted guy that they brought in and was a great find in terms of fantasy, they're going to be able to move the ball. And there's going to be a couple guys on this team that you're going to want to have, to consider taking to put on your fantasy team, when we start drafting in a couple months. So the next team is the New York Giants, my New York Giants. They did a lot this offseason, signing Kenny Golladay, bringing in Kyle Rudolph from the Vikings, signing John Ross from the Cincinnati Bengals to go with what they already have in Darius Slayton and Sterling Shepard, and to a lesser extent, Evan Ingram. And Saquon Barkley is coming back. They drafted Kadarius Toney, the wide receiver from Florida. Their offense is going to be really good, I think. And I think Daniel Jones, there's a lot of question marks with him, and I've kind of said, he's somebody maybe you want to stay away from. Me personally, I think he's going to have a good season. But in terms of fantasy, I would kind of stay away from him just because I'm not sure, how he's going to perform in fantasy. He threw 20-plus touchdowns his first season as a rookie. I think it was like 22. And then last year, he only threw 11. So that was a significant, decrease in the amount of touchdown passes that he threw. But, listening to a bunch of Giant fans talk about it, he went from having Pat Shurmur as his head coach and his system to, basically they changed the whole coaching staff. Joe Judge comes in. He implements his new system. Jason Garrett's the new offensive coordinator. So he's got to learn the playbook and all that, coupled with the fact that the Giants really didn't have, a true number one wide receiver, and Saquon Barkley was hurt, and the offensive line really wasn't that good. Now you're going to have year two in that system with the guys that you bring in, like Kadarius Toney in the draft, like John Ross, Kenny Golladay, and Kyle Rudolph, and even Saquon Barkley coming back, only playing in really one full game. And the offensive line should be better. It got better as the season went on, in terms of run blocking as well. We saw guys like Wayne Gallman break out, especially in the Seattle game where he ran, for over 100 yards, had a big run, I think, late in the game, to set up the Giants' first touchdown. The Giants, their offense is going to be good next year. And I think you're going to want to take guys like Darius Slayton, who's going to benefit now from the attention being geared towards Kenny Golladay now. Sterling Shepard, he is productive. These are guys you want to have on your team. Saquon Barkley, he should come back and hopefully has a good, solid season. And, definitely going to be somebody you're going to want to take in your leagues as well because, the Giants, they're going to want to run the football. Another team that's going to want to prioritize running the football as well. Maybe you do consider taking one of the tight ends that the Giants have. Evan Ingram, I kind of want to stay away from just because, he hasn't really taken off like we expected him to. Kyle Rudolph, I think, is a guy that, benefits from, getting into the red zone. He's a guy that, you would want to get it because, he is touchdown dependent, but, that's really the only reason why I would consider getting him. But let's see how he does. Maybe the Giants, they utilize him more than I think. I mean, they're definitely probably going to use him in the running game, for blocking purposes, but like I said, I think in terms of his productivity, it's mostly going to come in the red zone. So, but like I said, a lot of guys are going to benefit from the moves that the Giants made. Darius Slayton, I think, is going to be one of those guys that you're going to want to get. He might be one of the top two Giant players taken, or three. I think it's probably going to be Saquon, Golladay, and then I think Slayton probably goes third. So we'll have to see. Or maybe Toney goes third. Who knows? Because a lot of people really like the Toney pick. So we'll have to wait and see. But the Giants are another offense that I think is going to be great. And guys like Darius Slayton and Kenny Golladay, their draft stocks are going to be up there again this year. And, with Saquon coming back, people are going to want to draft him too. So, yeah, the Giants are one of those offenses that I think are going to be, one of the most improved going into this season. So another offense that I have is the Washington football team. I think that, especially bringing in guys like Curtis Samuel and Adam Humphries to pair them up with Terry McLaurin and Logan Thomas, their offense is going to be good. I think it is. Now, like I've mentioned, the one question mark is Ryan Fitzpatrick because it looks like he's going to be the starter. And, Fitzpatrick is a guy that's very streaky. He can have, like I've mentioned, like the last couple of shows or whatever, has games where he throws for over 500 yards and 5 touchdowns and whatever. But then the following week, he'll throw for under 200 yards and have 6 picks. He's very streaky. But, you look at the players that Washington has on their offense, to go along with Fitzpatrick, and along with the guys that they brought in, like Curtis Samuel and Adam Humphries, Logan Thomas, who was pretty good at tight end, last year, and he might be a guy that people are going to start, taking more. And listen, I think Ryan Fitzpatrick benefits from having big tight ends that they can utilize, and then you got Terry McLaurin, who, now that he has some established players alongside him, I think his numbers are going to jump up a little bit because of that. And now Antonio Gibson is the guy. He is going to have a good season, I think, this year. He had those couple of good games against the Cowboys. I think he's going to have a solid season. Like I said, Washington on paper has a pretty good offense. My concern is at the quarterback position. But I think when Fitzpatrick does have good games, the Washington offense is going to benefit from that. So that's another offense that I think is going to be very, very different going into next year. You have players coming in that had pretty good seasons and have been productive over the course of their career. Like I said, especially Curtis Samuel, because he kind of broke out. They used him in many different ways on the Panthers offense because, they even put him at running back because McCaffrey was out. Christian McCaffrey was out pretty much the whole year, only played in 3 games. They put him at running back. They utilized him a lot. And I think he's going to excel in this offense because now, he's not behind, 2 receivers like DJ Moore and Robbie Anderson. Now he's kind of like one of those main guys in Washington, and I think he's going to benefit from that. So Curtis Samuel is a guy that, you're going to want to get. Antonio Gibson, I think, is another one. Logan Thomas, and of course Terry McLaurin. I think for Fitzpatrick, he's kind of more of like that streaming option. If he has a good opponent, you're going to want to get him. But other than that, Washington is another team that I would say really improved their offense for this upcoming season. So another team that I have here is the Carolina Panthers. I think they upgraded at quarterback. They got some offensive linemen to protect Sam Darnold. They brought in the tackle Brady Christensen. They took him in the 3rd round from BYU. They brought in Tommy Tremble, the tight end from Notre Dame, in the 3rd round as well. They drafted another running back in Chuba Hubbard, 4th round from Oklahoma State. They took another offensive lineman. They took a guard, Deontay Brown, out of Alabama. So, they did a lot of things to address the offense. And they also took another wide receiver. They took Terrence Marshall Jr. in the 2nd round out of LSU. So they really, are trying to build up this offense. And I think the offense is going to be pretty good. I think Sam Darnold can be solid in this offense, especially because along with all that stuff that they did in the draft, you have Christian McCaffrey coming back, who's one of the best running backs in football, to help you out, be that security blanket for you, especially if you have to dump it off to him or check it down. Then you have DJ Moore and Robbie Anderson. Robbie Anderson, you have chemistry with him, especially, playing with him when they were on the Jets. So they got a good solid group of skill position players. And I think Sam Darnold, this is the best supporting cast that he's had. I think that he's going to have a pretty good season for Carolina. I think he should. If he does not, then he obviously, is not the answer, and he's going to be gone. And who knows what's going to happen with Sam Darnold. But I think in this offense, he should be productive. I'm not going to say he's going to light the world on fire and be amazing, but I think with the pieces that he has around him, I think he should be successful. All right, so the next offense is the Patriots. Now, mostly I'm going to talk about what they did in free agency. So Hunter Henry, Jonnu Smith, they got the 2 top tight ends on the market. Then you bring in Nelson Aguilar and Kendrick Bourne. And, listen, the Mac Jones pick, we'll have to see how that works out, because a lot of people are talking about, it's because of the players around him, that's why he was really successful in Alabama. So we'll have to wait and see. Will his game translate to the NFL? But, the Patriots, they really improved themselves. Their skill position players really were terrible last year. The running game, I think, was the one positive that they had. Damian Harris, he was, had a couple good games. So we'll see what they do in this upcoming season. I think they're going to be a better team overall. They got some guys coming back on the defense. So they're going to be a better overall team, and I think the offense is going to be better. And we'll see how Cam Newton does because, really was not good in the passing game. Really excelled in the running game, however, with all of his rushing touchdowns. So we'll have to see, but I think the Patriots overall, they did a great job at, addressing their issue, which was, their skill position players, particularly at the wide receiver spot, and more importantly at the tight end spot, because they had no tight ends last year. None. Absolutely nothing. And bringing in the top 2 free agent tight ends is definitely going to help out their offense and help out Cam Newton. And I think that you should take Jonnu Smith. I think Jonnu Smith or Hunter Henry. I mean, you could probably get both because Patriots love to use their tight ends, so I think, those tight ends you could definitely consider taking. I think Damian Harris is another guy that could be a sleeper pick that you might want to take. And Nelson Aguilar, I think he's going to be the number 1 wide receiver. So you might want to take him. And let's see how Kendrick Bourne does. Kendrick Bourne is probably going to be somebody you want to pick up off the waiver wire, depending on how the season goes. So, yeah, that's my outlook on the Patriots offense. They're vastly improved compared to what they were in 2020. They're another offense that really improved going into 2021. So the next 2 teams, I have the Colts and the Rams, and mainly because they upgraded their quarterback spots. I think Matthew Stafford is an upgrade over Jared Goff, and Carson Wentz is an upgrade over Phillip Rivers because Phillip Rivers is really not that athletic. I think Carson Wentz going back to Frank Reich and pairing up with him after Carson Wentz had that really good season in 2017 before he tore his ACL against the Rams. I think he's going to have a good season. He has a great offensive line around him. Jonathan Taylor, the running back, he's going to have a full season of running the football. And Jonathan Taylor might be a second-round pick in fantasy. And, I think they can do some work at wide receiver, but they did bring back T.Y. Hilton. Michael Pittman could maybe take a bigger step going into 2021. So we'll see what happens with the Colts. But they're an offense, I think, that improved, particularly because of the quarterback spot. And then you look over at the Rams, I think upgrade at quarterback. Let's see how Cam Akers does full season, being the bell cow. I think he's going to be a guy you're going to want to key in on. Deshaun Jackson comes over to the Rams from Philadelphia, but he doesn't stay healthy. But if he does stay healthy, he's a guy that can still blow past you when he's healthy. So, let's see what he does with that. And then, of course, you have Cooper Kupp and Robert Woods coming back. I think those guys, their numbers are going to go up with Matthew Stafford being the quarterback for the Rams. So then after that, we got the Jets, who I think, they really had a really good draft. And they got Elijah Vera-Tucker, the guard. They drafted him and to go with Mekhi Becton to help protect Zach Wilson on the left side. So Zach Wilson is going to have some protection this upcoming season. They drafted Elijah Moore, the wide receiver from Ole Miss. In 2020, in 8 games, had over 1,100 yards receiving and 8 touchdowns. That was a good pick for the Jets to put him with Corey Davis, who they signed over from the Titans, Denzel Mims, who they drafted last year, and Jamison Crowder. There's some stuff. Could Crowder be traded? Who knows? We'll have to wait and see. But the Jets really did improve their team. And Zach Wilson, threw 33 touchdowns and had only 3 interceptions. And, some people were saying how, the BYU receivers, there were a lot of drops. So, let's see how Zach Wilson does. I think the Jets are really building something really good. Robert Saleh, I think, is going to be, the guy that they've been looking for at head coach. And I think they're going to be able to put some points up. I do. But we'll have to wait and see. They're in a really tough division. They're going to be going up against some tough defenses. So we'll have to wait and see. But, I think the Jets, they can't be any worse than they were last year. So they're another team that I think really improved themselves going into 2021. Then I have the Bears, simply because you brought in Justin Fields. I went over, what he did in the last segment. He was great in 2020 in the limited season that they had. And I just think he's going to be an upgrade over Andy Dalton if he does indeed start. And I just think that players like David Montgomery and Allen Robinson are going to benefit from that. David Montgomery rushed for over 1,000 yards and, was productive towards the end of the season, especially weeks 12 through 15. He had over 20 points in each game, and this is going off of standard numbers. He was great in those games, rushing for over 100 yards in some of those games and, scoring some touchdowns in those games as well. He was productive, and I think, he's going to build off of that and go into the season and be one of those sleepers that you're going to want to take because he was really good towards the end of last season. And then an honorable mention, the Baltimore Ravens. They draft Rashad Bateman. I talked about how they didn't have a 1,000-yard receiver last year. Hopefully that boosts up the receiving core. They bring in Sammy Watkins over from the Chiefs. So hopefully Sammy Watkins can stay healthy and, the passing game can excel with that. And then they also brought in Kevin Zeitler and Alejandro Villanueva. The Giants cut Zeitler. The Ravens bring him in. The Steelers, they let Villanueva walk, and he went over to the division rival. And then Ronnie Stanley hopefully is coming back. Their amazing left tackle. So offensive line should be better for the Ravens. And their receiving core should be better. And I think because of that, Lamar Jackson is going to have a better season. And also J.K. Dobbins. Now that Mark Ingram's not there, I think he's the main guy now. I think now, especially towards the end of the season, we saw J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards split carries. But I think J.K. Dobbins is going to be the number one running back in Baltimore. So those are the top 10 offenses that I think, and well, let's say top 11 because, I included the Ravens as well. Those were the teams that I thought, really improved their offenses after the draft and after free agency. So with that, we're going to take another break. When we come back, we're going to talk about the 10 players that I think were most affected by the draft and by free agency. So with that, we're going to take a quick break. So stick around. We'll be right back here on the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
All right, and we're back here on the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast for segment number 3 of the show. We're going to talk about 10 players that I think were affected in some way, shape, or form by the draft and by free agency. Now, all these players are actually quarterbacks. So, let's get right into the list. So, first I have Justin Herbert. Now, I kind of talked about it, in the last segment, so, to repeat myself. So, the Chargers, they addressed the offensive line. And I think that's really important because, you saw young quarterbacks like Joe Burrow who got absolutely killed all season, had no offensive line, and, against the Washington football team, tore ligaments in his knee. And, was out for the rest of the year, and who knows, he might not even play week 1. So it's very important for these teams to prioritize building offensive lines around these players. And the Chargers have done that. Last offseason they brought in Brian Bulaga, to play right tackle. Now they bring in another Packer, Corey Linsley, to play center. I talked about they signed Matt Fielder, the guard from the Steelers, and then they draft Rashawn Slater. So they are prioritizing building around Justin Herbert and protecting this guy. They also brought in Jared Cook to play tight end to replace Hunter Henry. Austin Eckler is coming back from injury, and he hopefully has a productive season. So the Chargers are going to be a better team. And Justin Herbert, I think, is going to do even better because now that he's protected, I think he's going to be even better. So let's see what happens when the season starts. But Justin Herbert was one quarterback that I thought, with all the moves that the Chargers made, it's really going to affect his level of play, and he's going to make an even bigger jump in year 2, which I think makes him a very strong option for quarterbacks, when it comes to fantasy. He might be one of the first QBs taken off the board. It's going to come down between, I think, him, Josh Allen, Mahomes, Kyler Murray, just to name a few. He's right there. He could be the first QB taken off the board. So we'll have to wait and see. But Justin Herbert was one guy that I think was, greatly affected by what went on in the draft and in free agency. So the next QB I have is Jared Goff, who was traded to the Lions by the Rams in the QB swap that involved Matthew Stafford and Jared Goff. Now, I don't think Jared Goff is going to, be amazing this upcoming season. I don't think he's going to be, like he was with the Rams. I think there's going to be some level of drop in his productivity. But I think that he's in a lot better situation than he was, and now that the draft has concluded, particularly on the offensive line. I think drafting Penei Sewell was a great pick for the Lions. Give Jared Goff that protection because Jared Goff is good when he's protected. When he's not protected, he's terrible. And that's one of the main reasons why, after that trade, a lot of people were saying, well, Goff is going to be terrible because now, he doesn't have that playbook of Sean McVay. He doesn't have those weapons. He doesn't have the offensive line anymore. He's going to a team that's in a rebuild right now. And the Lions took a big step forward by drafting Penei Sewell, who was regarded as the best offensive lineman in this draft. And they also got, in the 4th round, Amon-Ra St. Brown, the wide receiver, in the 4th round. So they add him to the weapons that are kind of lacking. They brought in Brashon Perriman, I believe, and Tyrell Williams. So, the wide receivers are kind of lacking, even with the draft pick that they used on the wide receiver. They still have TJ Hawkinson there, and I think that's going to probably be Jared Goff's top target. And they also have DeAndre Swift, who was productive his rookie season. So we'll see what happens, but I think the Lions are in a better position than they were, just after free agency. I think that, now that Jared Goff's in a new system, let's see how he does. I think he's going to have some level of protection going into this season. And let's see, are the Lions going to be a scrappy team? Because, listening to Dan Campbell, speak over the past couple of days, there's a culture change in Detroit. And hopefully, the players kind of buy into that and they're able to perform at a high level or somewhat of a high level. And hopefully Jared Goff does well. He's kind of one of those guys that I hope, I'm pulling for him this year. I hope he does well. Now, in terms of fantasy, what do I think? I think I would still stay away from him. Now, in terms of a 2 QB league, he does have the potential to be a guy that, you have as your 3rd QB. I wouldn't start him right off the bat. If you're doing a regular league, he's probably a streamer option if he's going up, if he has a good matchup. So that's kind of his fantasy football status. But I think he's going to be protected this year. I think it really all depends on what the weapons around him are going to do, because they really don't have anything. I mean, Marvin Jones and Kenny Golladay are both gone, so he doesn't really have that at his disposal. So we'll see. If he's protected, if the weapons that he has around him produce, because Tyrell Williams was pretty much injured the whole year in 2020, but was productive in 2019. Let's see what happens. I just think that, in terms of fantasy, you maybe stay away from Jared Goff, but, now with the Penei Sewell pick, I think I have a little bit more confidence in the Lions being able to protect him. And who knows, maybe he'll surprise everybody and be motivated and have a productive 2021 season, though I think it's, more unlikely. But we'll see. So the next QB I have is Andy Dalton. Now, Andy Dalton, was signed by the Cowboys last year, to be the backup QB, and he had to play because Dak Prescott got injured in Week 5, that horrific ankle injury, and he played the rest of the season. Well, missed a couple games, Andy Dalton did, because he got concussed in the first game against the Washington football team. And, he did okay after coming back from injury. He did put up some good numbers. But I think now with the addition of Justin Fields coming into the fold, I think that Andy Dalton's going to be on a short leash. And I think for the most part, I think in terms of fantasy, you might want to stay away from him. Because, if he has one or two bad games in a row, Justin Fields is coming in. If Andy Dalton does in fact start. Andy Dalton, I think, is somebody you want to stay away from. Like, in all formats when it comes to fantasy. Because, they said, the Bears told Andy Dalton he was going to be the guy. And now they went out and they drafted Justin Fields. And they did tell Andy Dalton they were going to do that. So, I don't really know what to believe. But I think in terms of fantasy, Andy Dalton is probably a guy you're going to want to stay away from. Now, if you do a 2 QB league like I do, maybe you take him as your third QB, but I would probably stay away from him, just because, like I said, if he's put on a short leash, they're going to take him out. Justin Fields is the guy moving forward. And, the Bears don't really have a good track record when it comes to QBs. I mean, Bears fans were so excited when Justin Fields was taken. And I think the Bears, they're going to want to move forward with Justin Fields. And, Andy Dalton, he could be a good backup for them. If it does happen where Justin Fields ends up being the starter. But yeah, I think especially after the Bears taking Justin Fields, I think that kind of cements Andy Dalton as being a guy you just want to stay away from when it comes to fantasy. So another QB that I have here is Lamar Jackson, who I briefly talked about in the last segment. I think Lamar Jackson benefited a lot because the Ravens, they went out, they drafted Rashad Bateman, they brought in Alejandro Villanueva and Kevin Zeitler on the offensive line. I think that's going to help out the Ravens offense tremendously with run blocking and in pass protection. And like I said, the Ravens did not have a 1,000-yard receiver last year, and hopefully Rashad Bateman can provide some kind of productivity that the wide receiver position has been lacking in Baltimore. So we'll have to see. But, like I said, the Ravens were last in completions. They were last in yards per game in the passing game. So they're going to want to improve that, and I think they're only going to go up, based on the moves that they made on the offensive line and in the passing game. So, yeah, Lamar Jackson, another QB that I think will heavily benefit what happened what the Ravens did in free agency and in the draft. And I don't think he's going to be the first QB taken off the board. I think he's going to fall back down in the drafts as opposed to where he was taken, in 2020 because he was coming off of his MVP season. I think he's going to have a better season than he did in 2020 because of the better protection and because the Ravens are trying to help out this passing game. And I also forgot to mention they did bring in Sammy Watkins from the Chiefs. So they're trying to improve this passing game, and I think that is going to do wonders for this Ravens offense. I think Lamar Jackson, like I said, is going to have a better season than he did in 2020. But yeah, he was another guy that I think really benefited from what the Ravens did in the offseason, in the draft, and in free agency. And it will help him be, once again, one of the top fantasy options going into this upcoming season. All right, so the next QB I have is Daniel Jones. Now, I talked about him a lot on today's show, but, think about it. All the weapons that they added, Saquon Barkley's coming back. I mean, there's no reason why Daniel Jones should not do good this upcoming season. I think he is going to have his best season since entering the league in 2019. And I think he's going to replicate the numbers that he had in 2019. I think he's going to have 20-plus touchdowns. I think he knows the playbook now. He should know the playbook now. This is year 2 in this system with Joe Judge and Jason Garrett. Everyone's coming back. You bring in guys like Kenny Golladay, like Kadarius Toney from Florida in the draft, Kyle Rudolph, some established veteran guys. Let's see what he does. I think he's going to do good. I really do. I hope he does good. I think in terms of fantasy, you should be a little bit more optimistic in taking him in your drafts. But, there is some uncertainty because, there's a lot of expectations now. And Saquon Barkley is coming back. So let's see how he does. Personally, for me, I think he's going to do good, but I don't know if I'm going to take him. Now, if it's a 2 QB league, I think you could take him potentially as your third QB to ride the bench. If it's like these other QBs and these other players that I've mentioned, if you're doing like a regular league with just one QB, he could be a good streamer option if he's going up against, a bad opponent. Well, an opponent that benefits him, a team that's not playing well, and, a good matchup. So that's probably when I would, consider, picking up Daniel Jones or drafting him. If it's a 2 QB league and you want to have him as your third option, or, regular leagues, he's got a good matchup coming up, and, your QB's either injured, on a bye week, whatever the situation may be. But, it's hard to imagine that Daniel Jones is not going to have a good season. He's got the weapons around him. He just has to put it together, and I think he will. I think the Giants did a great job addressing the wide receiver position because that was something that was lacking last year. They still had some good options at wide receiver like Slayton and Sterling Shepard, but they were missing that number one wide receiver, and Kenny Golladay is going to provide that, and you bring in Kadarius Toney, who, like I mentioned in the previous segments, is a human joystick, and he's going to be making plays too. So the Giants offensively are going to be really good, I think, and I think Daniel Jones is going to benefit from that. And he's another guy that I think will benefit from what the Giants did in free agency and in the draft. He's another quarterback that I think is going to improve because of the moves that the Giants made. Another QB that was impacted based off of the draft and free agency that I think will definitely have some implications regarding fantasy is Tua. Now, the Dolphins, they brought in Will Fuller. They bring in Jalen Waddle. They draft him out of Alabama. Tua's got some weapons around him now. Other than Devontae Parker and Mike Gesicki. Myles Gaskin was productive at the running back position. Now we just got to see if Tua is the real deal. I think that, he showed some flashes, but for the most part, people really think that he underperformed. Especially, in that Week 17 matchup against the Bills. He was terrible. He was terrible in that game. So we got to see what he does. But I think now that you bring in more weapons for him, I think he's going to produce. Now, I don't know if he's going to be, another guy that's going to set the world on fire. And, I don't think he's going to be better than Justin Herbert or Joe Burrow. But I think he could be serviceable. And like I said, he did show flashes. But, they're not going to have Ryan Fitzpatrick, coming in relief to save the day. That's not going to happen. And that didn't happen in Week 17 because Ryan Fitzpatrick, I'm pretty sure, he got put on the COVID list. So he couldn't play in Week 17. And you wonder what would have happened if Ryan Fitzpatrick did play in that game, if they put him in. Would the Dolphins have made the playoffs? The Dolphins did go 10-6, and they missed the playoffs. So this is a playoff team. But it all depends on what Tua does. And I think it's going to be hard not to do well with the weapons that you have. Will Fuller is going to start the season, he's going to miss the first couple games because of a suspension, because of the PED stuff. But once he comes back, you're going to have him with Devontae Parker, with Gesicki, with Gaskin, with Waddle. That's a great supporting cast. And I think Tua's a guy that you can draft. He's another guy that could be a possible QB2, QB3 when it comes to, 2 QB leagues. But again, I think he's another guy that, either rides your bench in regular, formats with just one QB, or he's a streamer option where, again, if he's got a really good matchup that you feel confident in, you pick him up. So yeah, Tua, another guy that was greatly impacted by what the Dolphins did in free agency and in the draft. So a QB that I mentioned in the last segment, another guy that was impacted by what their team did in the draft and free agency, is Sam Darnold. And Sam Darnold is going to be coming into a new system. They drafted some offensive linemen, some tight ends to help protect Sam Darnold. He's got Robbie Anderson again. He's reunited with him after, all those years with the Jets. DJ Moore as well. Both of those guys were 1,000-yard receivers. Christian McCaffrey's coming back. They drafted a running back as well. So Sam Darnold's got a lot of weapons around him to be successful. And he's another guy that, again, like Tua, I think is another streamer option. He's got a good matchup, pick him up. Also, if it's a 2 QB league, maybe you take the chance on him and draft him as your third QB. I don't know. I think he's going to be solid this year. He's in a tough division, though, however. I think he's going to do good against Atlanta. I think he'll struggle against Tampa. The only time that he played Brady, he was seeing ghosts, back when, they were playing in the AFC East. But I think Sam Darnold, with the weapons that he has around him, this is the best supporting cast he's had since entering the league. I anticipate he's going to be solid. I think the Panthers did a great job in, helping build this offense along with the defense. I think the defense is the weakness of the team, but I think the offense is going to put up some points. I think Sam Darnold's another guy. His stock in fantasy is kind of going up a little bit. Getting out of New York and coming to a team, they got nice skill position players, and I think he's going to greatly benefit from that. So Sam Darnold, another QB on this list. So the next QB is Matthew Stafford. I think he is in a much better situation than he was with the Lions. He's got great weapons around him, like Cooper Kupp, like Robert Woods. They bring in Deshaun Jackson. They have a good offensive line. They got good tight ends with Tyler Higbee. And you got Cam Akers coming out of the backfield, who I think is going to have a breakout season, after the couple games that he put together towards the end of the season and kind of solidified himself as the lead running back for the Rams. I think that Matthew Stafford is going to have one of his best seasons, but the one thing I will say is he needs to stay healthy. He's been injured a lot, banged up the past couple of seasons. If he stays healthy, the Rams are going to be right there. They're going to be one of the top teams in the NFC. I worry a little bit on the back end of their defense because they did lose some key guys to the Browns like Troy Hill and John Johnson III to the Browns. So I'm a little worried about that, but I think offensively they're going to put up points. And he's an upgrade over Jared Goff. And this is probably the best supporting cast he's had. Now, obviously, none of these guys live up to, what Megatron was to Matthew Stafford. But the Rams are going to be a good offense this year, and I think this could be one of Matthew Stafford's best seasons. And then the next QB is Patrick Mahomes. Now, the Chiefs had a very productive free agency and a very productive draft. They traded for Orlando Brown Jr., the left tackle from the Ravens, who's really good. They signed Joe Thuney, the guard from the Patriots. They brought in Austin Blyne, I think that's how you pronounce it, from the Rams, the center. So they fixed their left side of the offensive line. And also the right guard that they have, Laurent Duvernay-Tardif, I think that's how you pronounce it. That guy, he was out, in 2020 because he actually is a doctor and was helping out, during the pandemic. So that's why he didn't play. They drafted, I think it was Creed Humphrey, they drafted the center. And Kyle Long is coming out of retirement too. So they fixed up that offensive line. And the reason why I put Mahomes on this list is because really, the Super Bowl, it was a mess. It was terrible. Mahomes had no time to throw. He was under pressure all game long. And you kind of worried about what the offensive line was going to look like going into this season. And their offensive line is going to be really good this year. Mahomes is going to be protected, and I think he's going to have another great year. It's hard to imagine he's not going to. And because of that, I'm putting him up on this list as well because based off of the performance in the Super Bowl and how bad the offensive line is, compared to what it is right now, I think the Chiefs' offense. I think the Chiefs' offense was still going to be great. It's just, was Mahomes going to be under duress all year? And it looks like he's going to have some time to throw. The one weakness is probably the right tackle because Mike Remmers is, I'm looking at the depth chart right now. Mike Remmers is slated to be the starting right tackle. He's not very good. So they got to address that issue. They could possibly bring back Mitchell Schwartz, who they cut, because they did cut both of their tackles. They cut Mitchell Schwartz. They cut Eric Fisher. But Mitchell Schwartz has the potential to come back. So we'll have to wait and see with that. But yeah, Mahomes another QB that was impacted by the draft and by free agency, and he's going to have another great season. And then finally, the last QB that I have is Jimmy Garoppolo. The 49ers, they took Trey Lance in the first round. They took him, he was the third overall pick. And I think Jimmy Garoppolo, he's going to be another one that's on a short leash. If he doesn't play well, the 49ers are going to very well might go with Trey Lance. The 49ers have great skill position players that really the missing piece is the quarterback. And if Jimmy Garoppolo gets injured or underperforms, Trey Lance is coming in. So we'll see what happens with that. Jimmy Garoppolo, I think I'm going to stay away from when it comes to fantasy. I did draft him as my third QB in my 3 QB league. I'm going to stay away from him because I don't know what's going to happen. He can't stay healthy, and if he underperforms, Trey Lance could very well be starting a couple games in the 2021 NFL season. So with that, those are the 10 QBs that were most impacted by the draft and by free agency. And with that, we are going to take our last break of the show. When we come back, we will talk about the NFC West and talk about all the players that I think you're going to want to get in your fantasy drafts. So stick around. We will be right back here on the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast.
Are you looking to get your college football fix? Looking to get the latest news on your favorite school's team? The GSMC College Football Podcast is your ticket to all things college football. Join us as we talk college football from the national championship, the college rivalries, the bowl game, to the Heisman Trophy. To which conference is the best? We've got you covered for the Big Ten, SEC, Big 12, the Pac-12, ACC, and everything in between. Download the GSMC College Football Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
All right, and we're back here on the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast for the final segment of today's show. We're going to talk about the NFC West and the players that I think you're going to want to get for your fantasy team. So let's get right into it. So we're going to go, it's the order in which the teams finished in last season, and, we'll just go through each team. So the first team that finished in first place was the Seattle Seahawks. And, it's pretty obvious on who you would want to get. Russell Wilson, Tyler Lockett, DK Metcalf, Chris Carson. Those are the main guys you're going to want to get. So kind of going through their statistics. So Russell Wilson, he'll be entering his 10th season in the NFL, was a third-round pick back in the 2012 NFL Draft by the Seahawks, was QB6 in 2020, had 40 touchdowns, which was second in the NFL, and had over 4,000 yards. Has played in every game since entering the league back in 2012, and he has been nothing short of spectacular. Had his career high in fantasy points at 359, and like I said, 40 touchdowns, which was the most he's ever had in a single season, with 13 interceptions, which was a career high. And some of his best games, he had 31 points against Atlanta in Week 1. Week 2 had 33 points against the Patriots. And Week 3 had 36 against the Cowboys. Put up 29 against the Cardinals in Week 7, that Sunday Night Football game that was amazing. 28 points the week after to the 49ers. But then towards the second half of the year, his production did decline. And I think it had a lot to do with the fact that the Seahawks running backs were hurt. The offensive line was banged up. And, Russell Wilson was running for his life and was trying to do too much. But I think this year, he's going to still be a top fantasy QB. I really believe that. I think that, he's always a safe bet when it comes to fantasy. And I think he should continue to produce. I really do. And hopefully, everybody stays healthy for the Seahawks. And, they're a top offense once again. And actually, let's also not forget that Russell Wilson, was in the news a lot because he came out and said, talked about his displeasure in the Seahawks, not being able to build an offensive line around him, saying he's been tired of getting hit. And the Seahawks need to prioritize that because, like I talked about in previous segments, the The Chiefs prioritized fixing that offensive line for Patrick Mahomes, and the Chargers, they prioritize fixing up the offensive line to help out Justin Herbert. That's what you have to do with these quarterbacks. You have to make sure that they are protected. If they're not protected, they are not going to be happy because they're going to be constantly getting hit. And, in the offseason, before all the Aaron Rodgers and Deshaun Watson stuff, there's all these rumors coming out that maybe Russell Wilson could get traded, and it doesn't look like that's going to happen. And I think that the Seahawks, their offense is going to be good once again. And like I said, I think they're going to be a top offense, and Russell Wilson is going to be a top QB in fantasy once again. So then we got DK Metcalf, who entered the league in 2019, was a second-round pick by the Seahawks out of Mississippi, only 23 years old, and, was great, has been great in both seasons since entering the NFL. 900 yards, 7 touchdowns his rookie season in 2019, and then 1,300 yards and 10 touchdowns in 2020. And then some of his best games came against the Vikings in Week 5. He had 21 points, had 28 points against San Francisco in Week 8. And, the first 2 weeks were really consistent, dropping 15 points in both those contests. So I think he's going to continue to produce, and he's another top guy that you're going to want to get. Now, I think he's more of a solid number 2. I don't know if I would feel comfortable him being a number 1 wide receiver for fantasy, just because I think sometimes he could be a little inconsistent. But overall, he's a productive fantasy option, and he's definitely somebody you're going to want to have on your team. So, along with DK Metcalf, there's Tyler Lockett, who had another solid season for the Seahawks, had over 1,000 yards receiving, 10 touchdowns, had 165 fantasy points, which actually tied his career high in fantasy points back in 2018. So yeah, he was very productive, and of course, looking at his stats, a lot of single digits in terms of points, and you could maybe argue that the game against the Cowboys where he had 3 touchdowns for 100 yards, that was 28 points, and again, this is going off of standard leagues, and then 38 points against the Cardinals in Week 7, 3 touchdowns there. You could say that those numbers really had a lot to do with the fact that Tyler Lockett's numbers, tied his career high in fantasy. Because other than that, you see a lot of 4-point games, 3, 5, 6, 2, basically, throughout the whole season. So he's another guy that's very inconsistent as well, or really boom or bust. So he's a guy, could be a solid number 2 or a flex option. I think I'd be more comfortable with him as my flex option. Because I did start off the year last year with Devontae Adams, Amari Cooper, and Tyler Lockett as my 3 wide receivers. And I was happy with that. But I had to let some of them go because I had to, fix up my team. But yeah, Tyler Lockett, again, is another guy you'd want to take in fantasy. I mean, yes, there's the boom or bust aspect, but it's hard to not take him because, he's got Russell Wilson throwing him the football. And he does have those games where he drops 30-plus points. So then for the Seahawks, finally I have Chris Carson, who's the running back for the Seattle Seahawks. Did take a step back, only played in 12 games due to injury, had 681 rushing yards, averaged 4.8 yards per carry, 5 rushing touchdowns, had 4 receiving touchdowns, had 287 receiving yards, which was the most in a single season for his career, only had 1 fumble. Had 150 fantasy points in some of the notable games. The first 2 games of the season did really good. Had 18 points against the Falcons. Had 16 against the Patriots. Again, going off of standard leagues. But, and then also Week 4, 22 points against the Dolphins. So he is productive. It's just, the injuries and being a little bit inconsistent is kind of, where he is a little bit of a risk when it comes to fantasy. But again, he's still productive. He's a solid number 2 running back that you would want to have on your team. My one concern, again, is 2 concerns, actually, is the injuries and the inconsistencies. But yeah, those are the players that, when it comes to the Seahawks, you're going to want to, get them if they're available for your fantasy team. So now, going to the Rams, obviously, I think Matthew Stafford is one of the guys you should definitely get on your team. He will be entering his 13th season in the NFL, was the number 1 overall pick back in the 2009 NFL Draft by the Lions, and in 16 games last year, was productive. Passed for over 4,000 yards, 26 touchdowns to 10 interceptions, had 260 fantasy points. Some of his best games came in week number 4 against the Saints, had 22 points, had 22 points against the Colts in week 8, had 23 points in week 10 against Washington, had 26 points against the Bears in week 13, and had 22 points against the Vikings in week 17. So another productive season. I think he's going to be even better considering the fact that, like I mentioned in the previous segment, this is probably the best supporting cast he's ever had. Not to say that, Megatron, no one's ever going to live up to that, but collectively, this is probably the best supporting cast that Matthew Stafford has ever had since entering the league, at least in my opinion. And the weapons that he'll be throwing to, you got Robert Woods, who in 16 games had 936 receiving yards with 6 touchdowns, and he had 2 rushing touchdowns as well. Averaged about 9.7 fantasy points per game. Had 155 fantasy points, and this is, again, going off of standard leagues. Some of Robert Woods' best games, 21 points against the Dolphins in Week 8. He had 18 points against the Bucs in Week 11. Had 15 points against the Jets in Week 15. He's consistent. He's a guy that's, a solid fantasy option. I think he's a guy that, is a solid number 2 flex option. And I think with Matthew Stafford, his numbers are going to jump up in fantasy this upcoming season. So I think he might be taken a little bit higher as opposed to where he's been, the last couple of years. And along with Robert Woods, we have Cooper Kupp, another solid fantasy option, coming back from that ACL injury that he sustained in 2018. 2019, he played in all 16 games, had over 1,100 yards, 10 touchdowns. But in 2020, did take a little bit of a step back, had under 1,000 yards and only 3 touchdowns, had 116 fantasy points. Did have a couple good games, weeks 3 and 4 versus the Giants and the Bills, had 16 points and had 12 points. And then in Week 11 against the Bucs, he had 14 points. He's a productive, reliable receiver. There was a little bit of some inconsistencies and, some underperformances, but other than that, he's still a productive wide receiver. And I think now, like Robert Woods, Matthew Stafford is going to elevate both Robert Woods' production and Cooper Kupp's production. All right, so next I have Cam Akers. And, Cam Akers towards the end of the season was really productive. Had 14 points in Week 12 against the Niners. Had 15 points against the Cardinals in Week 13. Week 14 against the Patriots was his best game by far, where he rushed for 171 rushing yards. Averaged 5.9 yards per carry. Had 19 points in that contest. So there was a stretch where he was productive. And I think that he kind of solidified himself as the top running back for the Rams. And I think now when you add a better quarterback in Matthew Stafford to your offense, I think he's going to excel with that. And I think now, second year in the NFL, I think he's going to jump up in production and produce. And I think because of that, he's someone you want to consider getting. He could be a number 2 running back. He could ride your bench. I think he's going to be productive in the 2021 NFL season, which is why I think you should consider drafting him. So now moving on to the third place team in the division in 2020 was the Arizona Cardinals. I really only have 2 players because, I don't really trust anybody else outside of these 2 players on this team. So first is Kyler Murray, the quarterback for the Cardinals. He'll be entering his 3rd season in the NFL, was the number 1 overall pick back in the 2019 NFL draft, was a Heisman Trophy winner. And, his stats did improve from his rookie season to his sophomore season. He increased in touchdown passes, had the same amount of interceptions. His QB rating was better with 94, had 3,900 passing yards, had 378 fantasy points, and that was particularly in the rushing category. Had 819 rushing yards, 11 touchdowns, had 6.2 yards per carry, and he averaged 23 points in terms of fantasy per game, which was 6 more than his rookie season when he only had 17, when he averaged only 17 points per game. And some of his best games, Week 1 against the 49ers, 26, against Washington, 32, 21 the week after that, 23, 26, 28, 37, 37, 29, 20. And then, the last couple games, he had 7 points against the Patriots, had only 16 against the Rams, only 18 against the Giants, had 33 against the Eagles, then 15 against the 49ers, and then only 3 against the Rams in Week 17. He was in and out of that game with some injuries. But overall, had a great season. He's going to have another great season. I think he's going to have 30-plus touchdowns in the 2021 season. And he's going to be one of the top QBs taken off the board. I think between him, Justin Herbert, and Josh Allen, those might be the top 3 fantasy quarterbacks going into the 2021 NFL season. And then his teammate, DeAndre Hopkins, who, has been a popular player on my show since I started. And, obviously I'm going to keep reminding everybody about the trade that was made before the season started in 2020 when Bill O'Brien traded DeAndre Hopkins to the Cardinals for David Johnson, which will go down as one of the worst trades in NFL history. And DeAndre Hopkins, has only missed 2 games in his career. And you look at his numbers from 2020, his touchdown receptions were down. He only had 6. Had 1,400 yards receiving, however. Did have 172 fantasy points and averaged 10.8 fantasy points per game. And again, all these numbers are based off of standard leagues. Some of his best games, the first 3 weeks, 15, 12, and 13 points. Then had 4 the week after that. Had 19 against the Jets, 7 against the Cowboys. And in large part, there was a big reception that he had during that game that kind of, inflated his stats a little bit for that game. Did, however, against Seattle have 10 receptions for 103 yards and a touchdown. That was 14 points in that game. Had 18 points against the Bills in Week 10. And then his best performance by far came in Week 15 against the Eagles. He had 21 points there, 9 receptions, 169 yards, and a touchdown. So, in terms of, he still produced. A little bit inconsistent, but I think, year 2 in the system with Kyler Murray, the Cardinals, they drafted a wide receiver. They brought in A.J. Green. I think that's going to help out the passing game tremendously. I don't think A.J. Green is going to be, what he was, obviously, in all those years in Cincinnati. But I think that, having him opposite of D-Hop, that's going to help out the passing game. And, we'll have to see what happens. I didn't include James Conner because I just think that, he's struggled to stay healthy over the past couple of seasons. So I don't think he's really worthy of drafting. Maybe, to be a bench player or something like that. But I think that, I would stay away from James Conner. So, yeah, Kyler Murray and DeAndre Hopkins, really the only 2 guys that I would consider drafting in fantasy. I mean, those guys are must-have. You got to have these guys on your team. Kyler Murray especially. I think he's going to have a great season. And finally, the team that finished in last place in 2020, the San Francisco 49ers. I did not include Jimmy Garoppolo because in the last segment I talked about how I think he's kind of a risk factor, with the injuries, with the 49ers taking Trey Lance in the draft. I think he's somebody you might want to stay away from. However, the 4 players that I included, George Kittle, Brandon Ayuk, Raheem Mostert, and Deebo Samuel. So George Kittle only played in 8 games last year. His season was derailed because of injuries. Only had 634 receiving yards, 2 touchdowns, had 77 fantasy points. However, he did have 2 good games. Week 4 contest against the Eagles. He caught all 15 of his targets, 183 receiving yards, 1 touchdown, 25 fantasy points there. And then in Week 6 against the Rams, had 109 receiving yards, 1 touchdown, and had 16 points in that contest. I think he's a guy that's going to have a bounce-back season. I always talk about how thin the tight end spot is when it comes to fantasy, and he's going to be one of the first 2 tight ends to be taken. It's going to be between him and Kelsey. Waller could possibly, go in between them. You might see Kelsey, Waller, and then Kittle. Who knows? But Kittle should have a bounce-back season regardless of who the quarterback is. I mean, this is a guy, in his first season, he was playing with C.J. Beathard, Nick Mullins, so he's able to produce, regardless of who's throwing him the football. So that makes him worthy enough to, draft in fantasy. And, also let's go into some of the other players. You have Deebo Samuel, who was drafted by the 49ers in the 2019 NFL draft. He was a second-round pick. Only played in 7 games, started in 4 games, had 391 receiving yards, 1 touchdown, only had 47 fantasy points. His best game, 13 points, Week 12 against the Rams. He had 11 receptions for 133 yards in that game. And, listen, his rookie season, he was productive. Played in 15 games, had 802 receiving yards, 3 touchdowns, 132 fantasy points. And again, in terms of standard numbers, or standard leagues, so I think he's going to have a bounce-back season. Him, and then you got him paired up with Brandon Ayuk in his rookie season. He played in 12 games, Brandon Ayuk, had 748 receiving yards, 5 touchdowns, 124 fantasy points. And some of his best games, the Giants in Week 3, 16 points, had 11 points against the Eagles in Week 4. He had that nice, I think it was like that screen that they did, and he leaped over a defender to get into the end zone. That was a great play against the Eagles. Had 11 points against the Patriots, 15 against the Seahawks in Week 8, had 12 against the Saints the following week, 15 against the Bills, where he had 9 targets. He caught 5 balls for 95 yards and a touchdown, had 15 points in that game. 11 points against the football team the week after that. 13 points against Dallas in Week 15. He was productive. I think he's another guy that, people are going to sleep on. Somebody that could be a great flex option for you. Same thing with Deebo Samuel as well. I don't know if I would elevate them to wide receiver 1 or 2 status. Definitely not wide receiver 1, but possibly a wide receiver 2. I could see that for both of them. And flex options as well. Definitely flex options. And then finally, Raheem Mostert. He only played in 8 games, had 521 rushing yards, 5 touchdowns, only had 83 points. But he did have a breakout season in 2019, had 772 rushing yards, 8 touchdowns, 151 rushing yards. And some of his good games, from 2020, had 21 points against the Cardinals, had 16 points against the Jets in Week 2, and then other than that, really didn't do anything because he was injured this past season. The whole 49ers roster was injured. The 4 guys that I just talked about, Mostert, Ayuk, and Deebo, and Kittle, they were all injured at some point during the year. So, the 49ers dealt with a lot of injuries. I think this year they're going to be healthy. So those are the 4 guys that, I would draft if they're available for you to get in your fantasy leagues. And with that concludes my analysis on the NFC West and what players you should draft, from these teams that play in this division. So with that is all the time that we have for today. Thank you for joining us. Make sure to subscribe to our social media platforms and write a nice review on our website. We greatly appreciate that. So with that is all the time we got. So I'm Kenneth Gruenfelder signing off from the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Have a good day, and we will see you next time.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.